நம்ம கிரியேட்டிவிட்டி பிளானட் சேனலில் நிறைய ஃபன்னி வீடியோஸ், கேம் வீடியோஸ், வீலாக்ஸ் அண்ட் நேச்சர் லவ்ஸ்ன்ற நிறைய என்டர்டெயின்மெண்ட்டான வீடியோஸ் இருக்குது. எல்லாருக்கும் கண்டிப்பாக பிடிக்கும். ஸோ சேனலை மறக்காமல் சப்ஸ்கிரைப் பண்ணி வச்சுக்கோங்க அண்ட் பெல் பட்டனையும் அழுத்தி வச்சுக்கோங்க. அப்போ தான் நாங்கள் போடுற எல்லா வீடியோஸோட நோட்டிஃபிகேஷன் உங்களுக்கு வரும். உங்களுக்கு கண்டிப்பாக நாங்கள் போடுற எல்லா வீடியோஸும் பிடிக்கும். ஸோ லைக்கும் பண்ணி வச்சுக்கோங்க. அப்புறம் மறக்காமல் உங்கள் ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸ்க்கு ஷேரும் பண்ணிடுங்க.
Hi friends, today we will be starting with the second chapter of a book, A Sweeping Look at Vedanta. The second chapter title is Life and Art of Living. The modern materialistic who denounced religion and who claims himself to be an atheist probably does not know that the superstructure of his skepticism is built upon the sand of 18th century materialism. In the 18th century, science discovered on the table of the laboratories that matter was composed of mere physical units called atom. They claimed that a combination of atom would become molecule, and they, in their close backups, become the substance. To them, therefore, the concept of God or creative power playing from the beginning, the name and form was absurd and redundant. In the age of materialism, the biologist prophet Darwin was the chair, and Darwin's theory of evolution gave a fill-up to materialism, which was advocated and demonstrated by physicists in the laboratory. But this was in 18th century. By now the world has moved 2 centuries ahead with this process. The very skeptical West had tampered with the atom, and recently they discovered that the atom is still divisible and its content, it is not but energy. Though science has thus marched forward to prove that energy is the fundamental factor in matter, a corresponding change in their view of scriptures is yet to come. The West has schemingly forgotten or overlooking the obvious discoveries of their own scientists. Though they claim to be progressive and scientific minded, they are conservative and intolerant. If the generation in the West were to make today a similar readjustment of their view of life according to the discoveries in the laboratory, they must certainly turn more of their attention towards spiritualism of their life. Indeed, if there is any country fully science conscious in that country, in that era of this intellectual history, Vedanta will be the most satisfying religion. According to Darwin theory, evolution is measured in terms of development in the psychological equipment and the availability of intelligence and the mind in the specimen. But to Eastern philosopher, though they accept different strata of being, the measuring rod for the estimations of growth is not the physical or mental development. According to the East, the standard of measurement is the amount of awareness manifested in a thing or being. Thus, in a stone life, there is a mere expression of existence, but no awareness or intelligence as such. A piece of rock does not seem to feel bothered by the insulting kick of the mule, nor does it feel in any way congratulated because a king has chosen to dine over it. It is totally unaware of the external climatical condition the place, or the treatment it receives, etc. But living the rock life, when we enter the vegetable kingdom, we find that compared with the stone life, there is certainly a great degree of awareness manifested in the life of plant. A plant is aware of external conditions of humidity or conditions of the soil. When there is a dearth of moisture, the plant dry up. When the water is supplied, they react to the external condition and absorbing the same seems to smile forth into liveliness and newborn charm. To the seasons and their corresponding climatical condition, the plant reacts. During the spring, many of them smiles forth into a joyous bloom. Thus, the more was sympathetical observe the mineral life and the vegetable life, the more we find to our complete satisfaction that there is a great degree of awareness in the plant life. Again, compared with the plant life, when we come to animal kingdom, we find there is a great amount of consciousness manifested. An animal not only reacts to the external circumstance but also seems to feel the blindly and perhaps only to limited extent the conditions of its own mind and intellect. Now, not only do the animals find their satisfaction in mere food and shelter, but they also have their own love, preoccupations with their mates as well, with their newborn kids. The birds and the animals seems to feel a intensive response for tending and nourishing their own babies. As a contrast to this, in the vegetable kingdom, the mother plant has no sympathies at all with their own young seedling thriving at its foot. There seems to be a bitter competition in the vegetable kingdom, while in the animal kingdom, between the parent and the animal kingdom, between the parent and the children, at least during their early days, there seems to be a great amount of consideration, sympathy, tolerance, and even love. To the nature, it is better a daily knowledge that the bird and animal prepare for themselves a fit and proper shelter for the changing climatical condition. Thus, birds and fishes living in the upper region of the gangs started moving towards down a winter approaches. Birds moving into the higher valley as the summer set in the plain. So, too, we are told that in the jungle life, wild animals migrate from place to place, seeking better caves, safe dens, healthier environments, etc. Thus, it is obvious that the animal kingdom does exhibit in their life a great amount of awareness of external conditions as well as to an extent at least of internal mental feeling than the plant life. Of the being, man seems to be aware more intensively of the external world and internal states of mind. The intensity of consciousness is again perceptibly different from man to man. It is not all men that are at all times fully aware or conscious of all their external or internal lives, but it is only a rare few that are the most sensitive not only to their outer life but to the pattern of their thoughts, emotions, feelings, and ideas. Thus, to the ancient seers of our scriptures, the theory of evolution is a story of slow unfoldment of the consciousness through more and more complicated and highly evolved equipments. Thus, viewed, the one great plan of nature expressed from the stone life to man life, the one continuous gold veins of the growth and development running through all manifestation seems to be the complete unfoldment of consciousness. The cheer were not merely scientists meddling with material equipment on an insignificant table in a corner of Megri laboratory. There were immense of Jain wisdom observing lives as a whole in the caves of their own mind and intellect to study the great themes of life in a spirit of pure detachment. Even here it is not life of giving period of history, but life in totality gushing out through the channel of ages. Each master conditioned and trained his discipline for such study of observed life and passed down his conclusion to them. And they in turn observed all through their life, their own generations working through those very same truth. It is the sum total of their unanimous conclusion that we have in the declarations of Vedanta's philosophy. If philosophy be thus a set of conclusions arrived at after a intelligent and scientific analysis of life as a whole, our study of philosophy or inquiry into the nature of creative power in us cannot be complete unless we know the meaning of life. Certainly, none among us could be a stranger to life. It is the business of every one of us, through despair and dejections, through love and tears, to wend our way. Life seems to be the only fact common to all of us, at all time, irrespective of our individual conditions or environment. If life be thus the main business of every one of us, we must certainly know that life means before we can hope to live at all, much less life consciously well. And yet, how few of us have given even though ever a thought to their problem of what life really is. I request you all to ask yourself this question: what is life? Are you silent? Do you know the reasons for the silence? The silence is but the language of confusion, in which the intellect expresses its own foolhardiness in living so long without knowing what life is. This is not strange either, nor even 1% of generation living life is truth conscious of what life means. And in this intellectual ignorance, the wise one of the ones of the world come to suffer the agonies of an incomplete living. The great rishi of old analyzed life, and as a result of their observation came to the conclusion that life is the sum total of one's experiences gained by one in one's contact with the external world of object and circumstances. Most of the moment time is marching on towards us, carrying on its surface, as it were, different pattern of circumstance and various challenges. We react to them, live through those circumstances, yearning for ourselves what we call the residual impressions, generally known as experiences. The sum total of experiences thus gained by one is the one's life. Thus viewed, the unit of life becomes experiences. Thus viewed, the unit of lives become an experience. When we analyze an experience, we can certainly understand that in order to produce an experience, there must be an experiencer and experienced with relationship between the two, called experiencing. The experiencer of the circumstance in our life certainly is not an unintellect physical body but an intellect agent mind. The mind is the subject of and the subject is the world's outside and circumstances. In this relationship, our reaction to the mind, the subject gains the phenomenon called experience. Here again, on the closer analysis, we can also observe easily that a given set of circumstances does not produces the same kind of experience in all the individual reacting to it. For example, the house number 5 in the 3rd street is reported to be on fire. The news is to the many only of just an incident of house on fire. But to the people living in the street, it is certainly a more poignant incident, and thus the news to them is of the house on fire in my street. Again, to the individual whom the house belongs, it is the great tragedy, since to him it is my house on fire. Thus, the extreme circumstances remain the same. As a house on fire, different subjects having different relationships with the object come to gain the different texture of experiences. Certainly, then a lot of attention is to be given by each individual in a fixed correct relationship between himself and the world outside, in order that in a healthy relationship between the two, a glorious experience may be produced for the individual. Based upon these conclusions, the great Rishi continued their heroic adventure in driving out the rocks of life and discovering the secret treasure chambered within me. Saying what is this? The finite world of objects is undergoing continuous change, and to adjust to their kaleidoscope variety of change, the subject needs effort of angels to dance to the mind tunes played by the changing world pattern, and to try thereby to gain a joyous experiences is of course frivolous and fatiguing. On the other hand, the great Rishis concluded that if an individual could by some method adjust his mind in such a way as it can find its equilibrium in every given set of circumstances, that individual has gained a permanent and certainly victory over the external world. The repeated assertion, the confident declaration of all the probate and of all great seeds of the world is anonymous. Thus, they all in one voice declare that one can gain this perfect equilibrium of mind. The technique by which this equipoise is gained by the individual is the technique advised in all religion of the world. Philosophy explained life and provided us with the health value of life. Religion in the realistic part gives us the pattern to train ourselves to fulfill the promise of the philosophy. When I say spiritualism, I don't mean the outgrowth of redundant so and poem that have now come to predominant in temple, church and mosque, but I mean the great spiritual exercise and the concentration, mental control and applications of mental energy in delightness and continuous meditation. With this understanding at the background of our mind, if we peer into the history textbook, we shall discover the main reason for the repeated failure of man in bringing about a perfect state of peace and prosperity, contentment, and satisfaction for society or for nation through his war and revolutions. The history of man, in fact, reads a melancholy story of repeated wars and revolutions. In the name of peace, we have learned to make weapons of destruction and kill each other with ruthless, monstrous efficiency. The peace that we know of today is but the exhausting, the fainting pause between the two immediate wars. After every spasm of cruelty and bloodshed, the animal in us, in sheer exhaustion, seeks a shelter wherein to mourn or to roll upon itself until it lets dry its wounds, and get ready to fight again. History has been a repetition of a scholar's suicidal mistake, and yet each spiritual warriors, each revolutionary leaders who had set the wheel of destruction in the motion was in fact intrinsically not cruel or bloodthirsty. Each of them, though, that if he could bring about a special pattern in life or bring about a new order of living into the world, he could thereby establish the maximum happiness for the maximum number. And that was at cost of so many lives. But we know that all the revolutions and wars we had so far have ended only in big sad failure. Even today we had not discovered that secret prescription for joy or that ever eluding system of perfect government whereby each citizen can come to bloom forth into the maximum happiness he is capable of. This is a failure that can be directly traced to the very ignorance in us of the real meaning of life and its component part. In the understanding of the revolutionaries, the constitutionalists, the politicians, and the economists, joy or tear is a result that must arise when reorganization of the pattern of things and circumstances in the outer world is accomplished. Their attempt is to bring about the scheme of life living for us wherein the maximum number of minds can come to feel the maximum happiness for the time being. But unfortunately they forgot that the external pattern of object cannot and will not consistently remain in any given scheme formulated through the force of the pen or tongue or sword. The pattern externally changes. The individual mind externally changes. It eternally changes. It in this builder of change to hope to maintain an equilibrium is a mere dream. Thus all revolution planned for a conscious living pattern are necessarily doomed to failure so long as they ignore the subject units constituted by the mental, the intellectual and spiritual personalities of man. Then in a philosophy, dream of despair at life. Then is philosophy a dream of despair of life? If it were so, long ago man would have thrown it overboard and got himself relief from its severe implications. On the other hand, true philosophy is the most optimistic call to man to act diligently and wisely, carving out for himself from the moment to moment a greater state of perfection, whereby he can come to live in a fuller world of nobler endeavors, pursuing values that endure. The solutions of the seers from the world seems to be a call to accomplish their inner revolution. According to them, the revolutionaries in the outer world cannot accomplish the promise they seem to give from time to time. The true goal of joy can be reached only if the mind and intellect of the individual are controlled and patterned so as to find for themselves their equipoise amidst the changing vicissitude of life. And this is a mere theory, either for a mere theory, as I had already stated, was not acceptable to practical minded audience. If this mental sculpture is to be started and fulfilled ultimately in an inner revolution, what are the strategies to be followed? What are the methods to be adopted? A detailed description of these techniques constitute the content of spiritual literature. How is this inner revolution conducted? We shall discuss this as further. This is a perfectly scientific method of purifying our thoughts, controlling them, and thereby gaining a mastery over their application. But this art of self-perfection an ordinary man can steadily and easily come to gain a complete victory over his mind. One who is the master of one's mind is indeed the master of the world. How this victory is won, we shall discover in our discussion tomorrow. But today, before I close, I would like to mention one more little idea. If so beneficiary be the practical aspect of religion. How is it? You may ask that religion today has drifted away from our life to flounder upon the rocks of decadence, became the debris of past vain glory. When we try to judge critically, the generation under sad failure to make itself blessed by the religious wisdom, we find that the failure is not so much because of the ignorance of religion beliefs or the spiritual truth among the people, but it is mainly due to the individual's growing incapability to live up to the ideal of religion that they already know. There seems to be in every one of us an endless conflict between our head and our heart. Though wholly convinced to our discriminating intellect are the blessings of higher value of life, our heart lacks the courage and heroism to translate those ideas into our everyday thought and action. We know truth, but we are not truthful. We do appreciate love, but we hardly live in love. Most hardened criminal can give the most beautiful discourses upon the divine quality of higher nature, and yet in his everyday life he acts as though he is preposterous, irredeemable animal. All spiritual literatures glorify truthfulness as one of the most important cornerstones in the edifice of perfect life. In many of our Upanishads, truth has been glorified. It has been said to truth. And to truth, the path lies through truth, and it is laid out all along with truth. In Sankara's commentaries, truth has been defined as a conformity of thought with action. In its subjective application, this definitely amounts to show that a heart that throbs truly to the dedicates of intellect is the honest heart. So to summarize, the more we attune ourselves in our accent to our intellectual conviction, the more we spiritually truthful. The more we attenuate ourselves in our accents to our intellectual convictions, the more we are spiritually true. In an era of materialism, when men are after some simple and fleeting sense tickling, their accommodations of heart to the dictates of their intellect could never easily happen in such an era. Therefore, we find that the noble idea preached by spiritualism or the noble value insisted upon the religion could not bless the generations. And this is only because of our failure to live religion, and not due to the lack of capability and efficiency of religion. A philosophy, however great it may be, cannot of its own accord bless any generation. Though I know that Aspro can cure me of my headache. That knowledge in itself is not a guarantee against headache. When I am suffering, I will have to go out and procure the medicine, administer it to myself, and wait patiently until the medicine get itself completely absorbed in my system. Similarly, a philosophy, whether it be political, economical, or spiritual, cannot of itself bless the generations, simply because we have codified them and have adorned our libraries. A nation is wise, or a community happiness. A nation is a wise or community happy only to the degree to which it in its behavioral and transaction of life attune itself to its intellectual acceptance, philosophical truth. Philosophy lived in our day-to-day life is called religion. Various easy methods are discovered and prescribed by the church. If they are followed, even unconsciously, a generation can be made to live the creative instinct and philosophical value in life. Religion is not only in temple; it is in our heart to be faithfully followed at all times in our life. That's it for today. We can see the third chapter, that is the technique of self-development, in our next video. Thank you.